Okay, let us continue with espionage. Let us take up first the first paragraph. So the act of the offender is he enters a warship, a fort, naval or military establishment or reservation. And the offender had no authority, and the purpose is to obtain an information or plans or photos or data, and the nature of the documents are said to be confidential relative to the defense of the Philippines. So, kung baga dito, pagpasok niya, pinasok niya ang warship, fort, naval, or military establishment. So, kung tingnan natin dito, puro government facilities ito. And ang offender dito walang authority to enter. And then, having entered the said facilities and establishments, he obtained information, plans, photos, and data. And it is very important that these documents na kinuha ay confidential and related to the defense of the Philippines. Let us go to the second paragraph. So the offender here is a public officer. He is in possession by reason of public office information, plans, photos, data, and the documents being mentioned here are said to be confidential and related to the defense of the Philippines. So kung bigyan natin ng pansin ang kaibahan ng paragraph 1 at saka paragraph 2, makita natin na ang paragraph 1, hindi na-mention doon kung ano ang offender, whether private or public officer. Pero dito sa paragraph 2, only public officers are liable. And that public officer in possession of the confidential documents relative to the defense of the Philippines or discloses the content to the representative of foreign nation. Let us differentiate espionage from treason. Both are not conditioned by the citizenship of the offender. So, pwede Filipino, citizen, or foreigner. In the case of espionage, it can be committed in time of peace and in time of war. But in the case of treason, it can only be committed in time of war. As we have discussed, walang malliable sa treason during the time of peace. And in the case of espionage, it is committed in many ways that is provided for in the Commonwealth Act 616. In the case of treason, there are two ways of committing. As we have discussed already, living war, and the other one, adhering to the enemy, giving them aid or comfort. Let us proceed to Commonwealth Act 616. That is an act to punish espionage and other offenses against national security. So these are the acts. First one, unlawful obtaining or permitting to be obtained information affecting the national defense. Second, unlawful disclosing of information affecting national defense. Third, disloyal acts or words in times of peace. Fourth, disloyal acts or words in times of war. And 5, conspiracy to violate preceding sections. And number 6, harboring or concealing violators of law. Let us continue with inciting to war or giving motives for reprisal. So the act of the offender here is unlawful or unauthorized acts. And his acts constitute provoking or giving occasion for war involving or liable to involve the Philippines. And there is what we call as exposure of Filipino citizens to reprisal on their persons or property. Ang ibig sabihin dito, ang ginawa ng offender ay of course unlawful or unauthorized acts. Hindi sinabi dito kung anong offender dito, whether private person or public officer. It does not matter. Ang ginawa ng offender dito ay prinovoke niya. Meaning to say, inudyukan niya ang isang bansa para makipaggiyera sa Pilipinas o di kaya posibleng magresulta sa giyera ng Pilipinas at saka ibang bansa. Mag-expose sa mga Filipino citizens para merong tinatawag na reprisal or yung resback. Sila yung tirahin on their persons or property. Next is violation of neutrality. There is a war where the Philippines is not involved, and there is a regulation issued by the competent authority to enforce neutrality. And the offender violates such regulation. And when we say neutral, that means that the nation or power not taking part in the contest of arms going on between others. So, merong giyera pero ang Pilipinas dito ay hindi kasali sa giyera. At saka merong tinatawag na issuances sa Philippine government na i-enforce ang tinatawag natin na neutrality. At ang offender, binviolate niya ang regulation na yan. Next, correspondence with hostile country. So there is a war involving the Philippines, and the act of the offender is correspondence with enemy country or territory occupied by enemy troops. And the correspondence is prohibited by the government or carried in ciphers or conventional signs, or contains notice or information which might be useful to the enemy. So dito, merong giyera at saka involved ang Philippines. At ang ginawa ng offender, merong tinatawag na komunikasyon, whether sa sulat or some other ways in the communication. So, merong communication sa kalaban or di kaya sa teritoryo ng Pilipinas na inokupa ng kalaban. And then, ang pakipag-komunikasyon ay pinagbabawal ng gobyerno o di kaya ginawa sa pamamagitan ng ciphers. Pag sinabing ciphers, yung mga secret code na yan. And then, or it could be conventional signs. Or merong nilalaman na information doon na magamit ng kalaban laban sa Pilipinas. Next is flight to enemy's country. So there is a war involving the Philippines, and the offender owes allegiance to the government. Ibig sabihin, ang liable dito, Filipino citizen lang. And attempts to flee or to go to the enemy country. And going to the enemy country is prohibited by competent authority. So, merong giyera at saka may isang Filipino citizen na nag-attempt. No, kahit na hindi pa siya nakalipad, there is what we call as attempt na makapunta doon sa kalaban na country.